You may have seen this news line already of the US Treasury confirming the end of pennies. This is something that I've kind of been looking forward to for a while. I heard about it once, and before then the thought never crossed my mind, but I was like, wow, this could actually be a really good idea. It seems like, when are you ever actually bringing out pennies besides maybe when you're using cash to buy? But cash is less common these days to use at most transactions. When I saw this, I was surprised and I wanted to read more into it, so I decided to just come up with a simple document about how maybe this could be good or a bad thing depending on, I guess, what you're trying to look at. I personally think most of it's pretty good, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, so let's hop into it. So why it could be beneficial? First thing is that it just makes more savings for the government as a whole. Apparently, as recent data, it costs 2.5 cents to make a 1 cent coin. So when we're making all these coins, we're losing tens of millions of dollars annually just because we're trying to make pennies that a lot of people might not even use. It's also environmentally beneficial because you don't have to do mining and refining for those metals as much, which can pollute the environment. And then also transportation and manufacturing emissions would decrease if production stopped. Although this can be kind of debatable because either way, you're probably gonna have stuff, other coins or cash or whatever it is anyway, but still overall it's less to deliver. It also saves time when you're at the register and you have to count all your change and your pennies. It can take longer, and maybe stopping the creation of pennies will encourage more cash users to start using card, but this one I don't see being a whole big reason or plus, I guess. Apparently though, Americans waste hours per year just trying to deal with cash transactions. So if you're someone who uses only cash for everything, maybe you could consider getting a card or doing tap to pay or something. Impact on the economy is also pretty minimal. Other countries have actually done stuff like this before, and when they got rid of their lowest coin, they didn't see any major inflation. A lot of them introduced rounding rules, which made it so actually you might even pay a couple pennies less or a couple pennies more, which I don't think the US is doing that. But then I also talked about digital payments become more dominant, so people who use a lot of cash maybe will start using debit or credit. And that's kind of its own big point as a whole, is modernization, using less cash and going more digital. I think also because of this policy, it can pressure the government to reevaluate other things that are going on. Maybe not as much with coins, but just currency policies in general to help save more money. So as you know, the US is in a lot of debt. This is kind of just a bonus. It creates less clutter because half the time you're having pennies in your cup holder in the car or in random drawers, and they just sit there forever and you don't actually ever use them, because who's just gonna take a couple pennies to the bank and put them in their bank account? Even if you end up collecting 1,000 pennies, you're just collecting $10, which, don't get me wrong, $10 can buy you lunch, but that's a lot of pennies to collect. So overall, you'll probably start to see less clutter in the long run. If you imagine 40 years from now and they haven't made a penny in 40 years, it's just gonna be hard to find them anyway. Here could be some potential cons. It's kind of interesting to come up with these ones. One is uneven distribution and shortages. Since pennies are disappearing, it's going to be harder to find them and use them. So if you have regions with higher coin use, like cash-heavy areas, they could face local shortages of pennies, leading to inconvenience. Most people probably don't live in a place like this. But also something that could be considered is the rounding rule that other countries have started to use. There's an increased strain on businesses. So for example, when banks or retailers need pennies for cash transactions, they might struggle to restock, especially the small businesses that rely on exact change when people use cash transactions. Another thing is that the quality of pennies downgrades, but I'm not one who really seems to care that much about this, if I have a good looking penny or not. There are private sector coin recycling costs that increase because coin counting companies, they need to process, sort, and redistribute old pennies more aggressively, which takes more labor and it's cost intensive. It's a lot easier for people like banks to just get brand new rolls of pennies coming in so that they can use them, but they're not going to be coming in anymore. One is long-term uncertainty for cash systems, mixed messaging. So if we're still allowing pennies but we're not making new ones, that can confuse businesses, especially when you're setting pricing. It could lead to inconsistent rounding practices. Like other countries have done, they might round up the dollar or to $1.05, whatever it is, the 5 cent or the zero mark. And the last thing is that it could delay real reform. So if you're halting minting without eliminating the coin, you might stall real policy changes. So just for a moment, the economy might be in a gray zone where it bears some of the costs, but doesn't reap as much of the benefits of the full elimination as if we just stopped using pennies altogether. Again, like I mentioned earlier, the rounding rules, so 2 cents goes to $1, 3 cents goes to 5 cents. Overall though, I think it's pretty beneficial. One of the biggest reasons alone is just the cost of savings. I know that if we stop making pennies, it's not really going to get the US out of debt. But overall, for how many people don't even use pennies, this could be a huge plus. And it's probably one of the biggest things that got me to think about the idea more, and then of course put it on the back shelf until this news came up. Let me know what you think about this policy change. Whether you think it's good or bad or a little bit of both. I'd love to hear your insights, especially if you're someone who's watching this who already had a change like this in your own country. Although I don't know why you'd care so much about this going on in the US, but as always, thanks for watching.